New Mexico CannaCast. Everything New Mexico, everything cannabis.
Megan and I are joined today with the crew from another podcast about cannabis in New Mexico, Chad Lozano, Josh McCurdy, and Shannon Jaramillo, our co-hosts of NMCannaCast or New Mexico CannaCast. Thanks so much for joining us today, guys.
Thank you for having us on. It's actually a pleasure. And, I love listening to you guys' your show, and I'm just glad we can do this crossover episode, so Sure. It's a pleasure.
So
thank you.
I've known all three of you for a while now as a result of my reporting on cannabis. And I know you all sort of fit into this category of cannabis patient advocates. Chad and Shannon, we've had you on Growing Forward before, but can you three tell us about how this CannaCast became a thing?
Well, Josh and I kind of took a step back from social media stuff and advocating for a while and kind of just focused on the grow because we knew legalization was coming. But once it did, and when things started kind of to roll, Josh decided that we needed to do a podcast and kind of get us out there, get the branding. So I came back to social media and we started doing more episodes. And then after the first episode, we realized that we needed a female on the show and we needed someone else too. We needed a female perspective, not just a bunch of dudes. And so we kind of thought for a while, and that's when we invited Shannon. And I think Josh wanted to add something too.
Yeah, no, you know what I mean? The NMCannaCast just happened. Like Chad said, I actually moved to Oklahoma, a commercial grow out there with the family and everything out, and then all that fun stuff. And when we went legal, here in New Mexico, I moved back. Being in the advocacy world, like you said, I was president of the largest patient advocacy group for many years. So got back and seen there was a need already to kind of help some education. So we started a page, and then trying to dodge social media. You know how it is. People pull you back into it and stuff. So we started doing a podcast, talked to, Larry Love at Medical Marijuana Radio. That's kind of one of my ways I got into advocacy. And so asked him for help, and and so here we are now, you know what I mean? And it's just evolved and just kept improving, and all we're trying to do is just give information out to people in New Mexico in the cannabis world, right? Because there's a lot of stuff out there that if you don't have the education or the experience, because it's been crazy for the last 10 years for us, that you might just miss and not know. And when I was in Oklahoma, I've seen a lot of failures, a lot of family failures, right? Small businesses and stuff. So I didn't want that to happen, especially coming back to New Mexico with the micro license and stuff. Just more education for people. And so, the CannaCast kind of just rolled off, and here we go. We do all kinds of episodes on everything, New Mexico and everything cannabis, just, keeping it fun.
So real quick, I realized, our listeners may remember when we talked to Chad and Shannon a couple times. Josh, can you give us a little bit more of your background? I think when I first met you, you were living in Ruidoso, but you have some ties to Oklahoma. Can you give us go back a little further in time?
Yes. So I started advocating back in 2013, 2014. I had a bad experience at a dispensary, and they gave me a letter saying you had to go 187 miles to get access. So my grandmother was a patient at the time, so that kind of just rubbed me wrong. And then I got right into it. I've been part of multiple groups in New Mexico, from the cannabis strategy team, different advocacy groups and stuff from the north to the south to the whole state. And then I've been growing for multiple years. I started growing, even before I was a medical patient, allegedly. All that. And then I got into growing, and kind of the plant picked me on this. I fell in love with growing it and just how it works and just everything else. And I nerd out at anything I do. I try to be the best at it. So I started the growing situation. I was terrible. My first grow, I was terrible. And so I just got better and better. Improving, got some other experiences from different states and stuff. And then, and then a couple of years ago was 2019. I went to, in 2020, went to Oklahoma, family farm, we opened up there, got to see that commercial side of it. And then when we went legal here, I moved back to New Mexico, back to Ruidoso, because I love the mountains. I graduated high school from Carlsbad, so I've been in New Mexico for a while. And then, like I said, came back and just got right when the legalization hit the ground running, just to help anybody I could. and especially on the grow side. I know how difficult that is. I've been a grow consultant for many years. I've worked at commercial nurseries. I've worked, you know what I mean, on that side, and then even some other commercial things throughout other states. So I just wanted to come and help people. Like I said, I seen a big tragic thing in Oklahoma through one of the freezes there, where a lot of people lost their farms, and then it was just sad. And I just, you know, come back here to New Mexico and was just looking to help people out and through all my experience, right? Because the only way you can get good at something is kind of messing up quite a bit at it until you learn it. So I've been very blessed. So New Mexico's been wonderful. And the cannabis plant is my grandmother passed away last year. It'll be a year on the 17th, but the cannabis plant gave me an extra 10 years with her or more. So I feel like I owe that plant quite a bit. And if I can help anybody have their family members have a better quality of life just from knowledge, you know, that's huge to me here in New Mexico. And then just keeping New Mexico as like a team. Like everybody wants to compete against each other here in New Mexico, but realistically, it's the nation. Like we have New Mexico True already. We have some wonderful things here in New Mexico. So we need to work with each other to become just a powerhouse in the national level that's coming. And I wish people would see that even more. So worrying about competing against each other, helping each other be stronger, because you know, there's a lot of bigger money out there on the national level and stuff. And I believe New Mexico could be one of the greatest places to produce some of the greatest quality cannabis at the cheapest price per gram in the nation. So,
Shannon, we've talked to you before. How does your work with your company Seedcrest work into being part of the NMCannaCast?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, and thank you. Nice to see you, Megan. And Andy and everybody, Kevin too. It's great to see all of you guys. So, you know, when they asked me to jump on the NMCannaCast with them, the NMCannaCast, they asked me to come with an attitude of educating people and of expertise around policy and kind of the community. And so, of course, I draw from my experience of Seedcrest and of working with the community. So really, it's not meant to promote Seedcrest in any way, but meant more so to have me on the NMCannaCast so that I can be, I guess, a center of influence and an expert that the community can rely on. So we give away free tips, Megan. We give away a lot of information that, of course, I'm fortunate enough to learn from by working with small businesses and by certifying the workforce. And so that's pretty much how it plays in. But the other piece is bringing more women on to the show and showcasing more women like myself and more diversity. And so, of course, you know, we're celebrating Pride Month right now, right? And I celebrate it year round. And so, you know, these guys, you know, they bring a lot to the table themselves. And then you add me to the mix and you throw that little extra color in there, right? And so that's what I'm doing with the podcast.
Your podcast focuses a lot on destigmatization. And now that New Mexico's legalized recreational use cannabis, where do you see room for improvement when it comes to furthering that destigmatization?
Well, I think that we all have a responsibility to destigmatize, normalize, and professionalize and validate the plant and the industry and those working and consuming by talking with folks who still are on that other side and still upholding that, you know, stigmatized ideology or idea of or perception of the industry or the plant itself. And so the podcast definitely focuses on that. And we definitely try to bring as many people on who have different stories to combat that so they can normalize it from their perspective as well, right? Josh has a story, Chad has a story, I have a story. We just met earlier today with Senator Hamblin. She had a story, right? You guys have stories. And so that's what we're doing around destigmatizing with the podcast.
I'll pose this to all three of you. We'll start with you, Shannon, but obviously I know you all three can't speak for every patient in the state, and we're still quite a ways from the next legislative session. But what do you want to see addressed in potential legislation next year, Shannon?
Well, you know, there's so many different things. This is a loaded question, Andy. You know, I really think that we could address the social equity aspect and the reinvestment into these businesses and the workforce. I know that that along with, you know, more educational pathways and paid for education. And so, you know, with the legislation, I just encourage that we're being thoughtful in the gaps. We're promoting 11,000 jobs, but we don't really have that, we do at Seacrest have a pathway, but the state hasn't identified or shed light on that, right? And so I encourage that we have, more information and something else written in that allows for those legislators to carve out funding for just normal, educational, routes into the industry. We've got a huge gap in cultivation, extraction, and testing. We have a lot of entry-level people coming in, but we still haven't made that pathway clear, nor have we made financial aid available through traditional college or university channels, let's say. And so, social equity, education, and reinvestment into businesses is what I'd like to see addressed.
So I'll pose that same to you, Josh and Chad. But also, I know that Josh, like you've spoken to me, and I've heard you on the podcast talk about sort of, don't break the rules because you're going to make it worse for all of us, right? We talked about over too much regulation. But what would you two like to see, come up to sort of fine tune the Cannabis Regulation Act?
I would like to see definitely the micro licenses go up to 1,000, definitely. And then with the water, I would like to see, I work with a lot of different grows throughout the state, and the water, the way we convert it. If you have agricultural water, I believe you should, if you have water rights, you should be good. You know what I mean? It don't have to be special or have to convert it and you lose 1/3 or whatnot. As long as you're, you know what I mean? A lot of cannabis growing is definitely a lot of indoor in greenhouse, right? Is super precise. So that would be interesting. It opened up and we wouldn't have such a delay. I think here in New Mexico, we're scared to be Oklahoma, but we're not Oklahoma. It's not a $3,000 license for unlimited plants with unlimited water or anything like that. So I would believe that's my two things is kind of relook at the water, make sure we have certified water. That's it. If it's, you know what I mean, definitely in there, because when you get to realistically looking at irrigation water and agricultural water and how much just evaporation is, it's huge. So I know everybody's scared of the devil's lettuce drinking a whole bunch of water. I get it, but it doesn't. Okay. You really get down to it. You get down to the science of it. It's really a pretty amazing plant. It's
The
super
devil's
effective.
lettuce? I hadn't heard that before. That's really funny.
No. Yeah. The devil's lettuce. Yeah. I talk about it quite often. But I grew up in Eddy County, very conservative. So I grew up, you know what I mean? At 17, I beat up one of my best friends for smoking cannabis because it was going to ruin his life. Right. And I'm 41 years old, so deep into it and know more about the plant than I ever should. It definitely, I would just definitely like to see, like I said, the water rights and the 1,000 plant count for the micro license. And that's really it. I mean, to me, I think they did a great job with what we got. I was really surprised, how open they opened it up for us. And yeah, it just, maybe a different seed to sell. I'll put it that one. I'll leave that too.
Yeah, and so I guess with me, I would more or less want to see something with the taxes. The plant tax, the individual plant tax, that's going to have to go away. If we really wanted to put a big dent into the black market, we're going to have to really go back and look at our taxes, especially once the taxes start to increase in the next couple of years. We're actually probably going to have to go back and stop that and maybe decrease it a little bit, because that's just going to fuel the black market even further. And if we increase it to where it's going to be, I think in 2025, that's just going to create a crazy nonsense. Because right now, overall, if you purchase cannabis at $100, you're paying about $20 in tax. So if you increase it even more, people are just going to pay more in the end. And then the black market is just going to thrive even more. And then we're going to end up like California, because California is actually going to take away their plant taxes and stuff like that. And another thing is working with the individual municipalities a little bit better, because certain things that they've done either have gone against the law, or they've been able to do things that I feel like they shouldn't be able to, especially when it comes to like consumption lounges. Some places have just flat out banned them, and when we added them, they were meant to just be for everybody, and especially visitors who can't smoke in their hotel or the Airbnb, or someone who lives on government housing. Military spouses, their spouse is the one that's in the military, not them, so they can have a card still, but they can't live on base and bring cannabis on. So that's what the consumption lounges are really for. And I feel the cities banning them outright is really doing an injustice to the visitors and the people that live within their communities.
Real quick, to touch on that tax issue, my understanding is that we've got the excise tax that the consumers end up paying. I mean, it's a responsibility of the businesses. And you mentioned a plant tax. I know that California is doing, or maybe Sacramento or something like that is doing away with it. But so for producers, do they have to pay a tax when they subscribe to those flowers, or I know there's a fee there, but is there an extra tax there?
So when you're a large producer, you have your regular license and you pay for that. But when you have your plants per plant, you pay, I believe it's $5 per plant. And so that adds up very quickly. And certain cities, I believe, and counties have added their own plant tax on top of that. So that incorporates these cities and municipalities be like, oh, well, if the state's going to incorporate these taxes, we're going to do it too. So, when the state does it, a lot of the times the cities do it too, if they feel that there's a way. So that's why we really need to go back and look like, okay, let's get rid of this plant tax and not allow these cities and municipalities to add an additional tax or additional fees in general when it comes, because some of these places, they're giving them fees just to apply in the city, just to get a business license. And that's not right. They shouldn't be able to do that.
And then for the listeners that don't know, just to be clear, that fee that they're paying for plants, that is separate from the cost it takes to get them from whoever's producing the plants or the seeds or whatever it is you're buying. You have to pay the state a fee per plant that you plan to grow, right?
Yeah, and this isn't if you're a micro producer, this fee doesn't apply to you, so you don't have to pay that individual plant tax, but you only get 200 plants.
Flowering plants, right?
Yeah,
so, yeah. That's another thing that was changed in New Mexico, that they changed the program. We just talk about flowering plants right now. So yeah, that's another thing too, is that's kind of what limits licenses is because $5 times the 16,000 is not $80,000 to get a full plant. A load is going to cost you 80,000 plus all your other licenses on top, your little license on top of that. So you're looking at $100,000 to really get in the game on it, just on a vertical, just to get in, right? We're not talking about getting stuff ready for your plants or anything. So, that does limit quite a bit of people in the game. So,
and it goes to equity too. It's not very fair to do that to people who are trying to get in, who maybe don't have $100,000 just for that portion. So that's something that maybe needs to change in the legislature and very soon.
I was just going to ask you guys about that. The money from the industry is definitely flowing in. And originally, the legislature had planned to set up some specific funds with that money for things like education and helping ensure equity in the industry that sponsors wanted. Those funds were scrapped in order to get the Cannabis Control Act passed and into law. So would you like to see those proposals come back now that money is no longer hypothetical?
I would like to see it more controlled in the local areas, though. More, if instead of giving the state the 12%, let's we give them 4 and keep 8 in the local area. So, the people that are impacted locally by it, or the municipalities that want to do better, want to have this thriving industry for these little communities that don't have anything else but this, maybe. So we can help have them do better and maybe write a storybook, a beautiful story about cannabis helping a little community prosper. It's instead of being devil's lettuce and we're all going to get crazy. So I definitely would like to see, I would definitely, like Chad said, drop the tax or just limit it to 10% at the whole level. On the retail side. And make sure we get that to the communities. So the communities that really want to do better and want to thrive, they benefit from it, right? Like we were talking to Sunland Park and just getting an idea of how many stores they had. They would be able to get two full-time officers within weeks. Just with their 10%, that they had on it or whatnot. So, it would be better to have that extra money to be able to have it locally, to me. So, I would definitely like to see that happen.
I agree with my 2 amigos here. We're the 3 amigos, by the way. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that there's and Megan, just back to your question, there's a chance to capacity build in New Mexico with this program. I've seen it myself. Santa Rosa, New Mexico, back in 2018, we took about 7 or 8 people out there and relocated because we were starting to tap into the town there for a hemp company. And that was beautiful because I could see what they had to offer their townspeople or the local community for jobs. And what we were bringing in was an opportunity that these people didn't have access to prior. And it was bringing back some people to the community. And also we were able to tap into some of the people from the high school coming in. Now with the age limit, you know, they have to be 21 to work in the field, but you can absolutely see how taking these, you know, businesses starting up in these small communities can bring jobs and really help these smaller communities to capacity build, bringing jobs back, bringing our, you know, keeping some of our college students here to work, putting benefits and decent wages on the table for people. And so I definitely think it's time to readdress that and to look at how they're going to carve out this money. And I have a little bit of confidence that they will, because I think a lot of us are going to be knocking on their door, right, to make sure that they follow through with some of these promises.
Shannon, you had mentioned equity earlier in our conversation here. Part of the intention was to, you know, give a leg up to some of these people that have been victimized by the war on drugs and sort of put an created an equal playing field for folks in the industry. How are we doing on that so far? Or what like, are there specific things that lawmakers can do to make sure that we're better at that?
I mean, I think that they definitely have a focus on it through the CRAC, you know, or the CRAC as they call it, the Cannabis Regulatory Advisory Committee, and they're definitely talking about it. I just don't see a lot coming out of that right now. They do have an application out, and they're letting people apply as, you know, through this, you know, application indicating that they're in a disproportionately impacted area, and so there's some markers in place. They're starting to talk about, you know, some funds available to, you know, folks through the social equity program. But I definitely think that we need to put some sort of a project together around this and get the State Department's hands to meet, because we have some wonderful programs that could be of use right now that just really aren't touching this. Economic development, the Department of Economic Development, you know, a lot of their programs aren't reaching into this yet. And so when I look at it overall, I challenge them to really kind of put their hands together and their heads together over this. I know a lot of community members are doing that right now. So, you know, we don't want to end up like Illinois, who promised social equity, and then here they are 5 years later with nada, you know, and so we really don't want to go there. But I think it's going to be interesting to see the statistics at the end of the year and the data that the division has compiled from the application process now. And then we can kind of go from there and see kind of how has this really played out for our actual micro businesses and actual New Mexicans. So I'm eager to see that data and see kind of like how that turns out, so that then we can kind of put some measures behind and point to some applicable programs. That's where I'm at on it, is, you know, there's a way that we can go about this. I think legislators should reach back into the community to some of the original folks that were giving them information around the marijuana working group. And I think that there's a lot of people like Josh and Chad, even you, Andy, that these legislators can reach out to kind of tap in for this type of, you know, information and input and expertise.
I'm going to keep you in the hot seat, Shannon. I interviewed you last week for a story that's now up on NM Political Report's website about education standards, specifically when it comes to cannabis servers. Can you explain to our listeners what a cannabis server is, and a little bit more about your concerns on their training or lack of?
Sure, and thanks. I saw that article. It came out wonderful. You did a great job. So, you know, a cannabis server is an individual who works for a consumption lounge, a cannabis consumption lounge. You can liken a cannabis server to a bartender, okay? And right now we're likening bud tenders to bartenders, but truthfully, the cannabis server is the individual that hands you, you know, a microdose, or is allowing you to take or ingest your cannabis in a cannabis consumption lounge. The Cannabis Regulation Act is the statute that gives us access, and in that act we have a couple of line items in there that indicate that cannabis servers should have a permit like the alcohol servers permit, right? And so, you know, my take on it is that we've delayed the educational process by not opening the application to cannabis server permit providers to provide this permit. Yet we have opened the cannabis consumption lounges, and we've got cannabis servers a little under supported right now for the liability that these consumption lounges pose. I in no way am against cannabis consumption lounges, and nor am I pro massive regulations. All that I'm saying is that we now have a huge liability, and we put the cart before the horse, so to speak, right? And so I'm hopeful that the cannabis consumption lounges that have been allowed to open and operate have some mechanisms in place to mitigate their own liability while the state starts to pick up pace around this gap.
What do you want to see the state ultimately do? Do you want to have some of the things they have for, like, they require for alcohol servers? Do you want something more than that?
No, I want a standard. I think that it's a little bit all over the map, and these individuals working in the workforce are tasked with disseminating information and education to the public. And so it's either the Department of Health take on a public health campaign, and which, let's just put it this way, ain't gonna happen. Okay, we already had that kind of come and go, right? And I believe that we're past that. So now it falls on the CCD to standardize. And I know that in other states they have, through statute and through regulations. And by standardizing, I don't mean saying, you, Megan's dispensary, give these topics to your employees, and then you, Josh's dispensary, do that as well. I mean, giving them tools and resources and telling them this is the standard, and here's what we really want you to see in these dispensaries. That way, everybody's kind of speaking the same language or similar language as we disseminate it out to the consumer base. And that's in an ideal world, I realize, but it's achievable. It's so achievable. We've been achieving that at Seedcrest for over 5 years. And so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We actually have, great resources available. And like other states, Illinois, Washington, and Alaska, they put together these types of standardizations, and they opened it up to give licenses to these educational providers. And so I just want to see that through. And then we've got a lot of road mapping to do around that here in the state. So the standardization is, I think, the heartbeat of what I'm requesting.
So you're saying standardization in terms of people who would be educating the workforce, but you don't foresee a time when we should have, like, okay, all you bud tenders, you got to go get these certification credits every year or whatever, every 2 years. Or...
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Standardization with certifications, and that becomes the standard, and also the pathway for them to the industry, right? But I also don't think they should have to go to college for that. I think that it should be accessible, and I think that it should be on a sliding scale fee, and I think everybody should have access to it, right? And so that is where I think the state comes in with that reinvestment and in making that a possibility.
Okay. We have been talking to a lot of folks about banking and financing in the cannabis industry. What kinds of things have you all heard about or even experienced when it comes to things like finding physical spaces or coming up with funding?
Well, I'll let Josh go on first because he's dealing with that right now.
It's been unique in a lot of ways. As far as with banks and stuff funding, I have a consulting company and a management company where I manage grows and consult grows all over the state. And one of them actually applied for the the business loan for the micro licenses. And that was a very unique process. They told
from the New Mexico Finance Authority.
Yes. So that they're both very professional and come from very that world. And they said that was one of the most stringent things they've gone through ever. So I thought that was really unique because I know how on point they are with their paperwork, and then how most other people aren't. So that's definitely going to be a little more difficult for a lot of people that are not really, that the accountant smart of it or the business planning smart of it. I think they'll be at a disadvantage on that side of it. But yeah, as far as banking and stuff, it's you got limited options. I've heard new things coming along as far as people lending out money. A few banks out there lending out money, but it has to be, one of them definitely wants to be for real estate or whatever. So they know they're going to get their money back. It can't be for equipment or anything like that. I know there is lending out there. I work with another company. It's a national level company that do lend for, lights and everything else, to all your grow equipment and stuff. It's just a lot of work, like a lot of, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, make sure everything's there. But it's a lot of work, and it's not like a whole bunch of money. People in the cannabis industry, you're better off finding, private investors or that level, secondary portfolio lenders, stuff like that. Anything, it just seems easier to get money like that and have a great business plan if you're going at it. And even now, I have stuff that had put on a invoice. So because everything's raised up 10% on the equipment in the last 30 days. So, when you're making $1 million purchase for equipment, 10% is another, if you can save that, please try, in the business world. So that's what my experience is with everything so far with finances and different. I know there's 3 different banks. There's actually one down here, Western Heritage, that's taking interviews and stuff and people. And I'm fortunate enough that, I work with companies that work with them. So that's great. And then I heard, US Eagle doing that, and the Southwest Capital, so.
Yeah.
And I have
And one thing I try
to say on, oh, I'm sorry, Chad, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing I try to tell people is do your best to stay away from using the actual word cannabis or marijuana in your business name when you're doing banking accounts, because a lot of the times they won't give you an account, if at all. If your name has cannabis at all or anything to do with it, they're going to veer away from you. So I just wanted to give that, little piece of advice for certain people.
That's spot on. And I'll say just real quick to kind of my experience in working with, startups going into from ground up, starting their entity to applying for a business to launching their business. I've been doing a lot of that work in the last year and a half. If they're in the southern part of the state, Megan, they're pretty much at a loss for a bank right now, unless they go and they're catching that heritage train, which is new to me as of last week. I have some clients out there. Well, Seedcrest has clients out there that, are saying, so we're going to have to bank in Albuquerque and transport money across the state. And so there is a deficit away from talking about lending and investor stuff. Just starting a bank account is a feat for a lot of these individuals, and then understanding how they're then going to, transport their money and that sort of thing. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there too, to kind of say it's still a huge challenge, from the actual account to the lending to all of it really. And we need more banking availability for New Mexicans.
Well, actually, we've heard, which surprised both of us, beyond just, a business loan or a business account, even if you work in the industry, it can be difficult to, like, say, get a mortgage. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you address that unless you kind of change federal banking laws. But are you guys hearing that from folks you talk to?
Yeah, I've experienced it myself in buying a home. And so, yeah, I mean, on my application, cannabis NM staffing, that's where Chad's comment comes in. And all they see is that you work or own that business, and they're assuming, right? And they just knock you right out, right? And so there's these little ways to kind of get around that. But yeah, even your employees, when you directly deposit their checks, if you have a big cannabis name, their bank could drop them just for working for you, right? So as we're helping entities to set up in the incubation stage, it's like one of the first things we say is, no need, you can set it up that way and DBA, but your bank account name needs to be something not cannabis obvious or hemp obvious, right? So
I was gonna actually bring that up, Shannon, because it was a recent episode you all did where you talked about changing the name to Seedcrest because of that. But some of those things are sort of like best practices, and a lot of times you all offer free advice to these the folks that are getting into the industry just now. Are you getting a big response from that? Are you getting calls of like, are you guys now becoming the sort of Google of the New Mexico cannabis industry?
There's not a lot of small business incubators out there, right? And so one of the things we immediately put in place were these workplace forums and small business trainings, dispensary management trainings. And because we live and breathe the cannabis regulations and the policy and the law, yes, we are. And yes, my phone and our phone at Seedcrest is ringing off the hook. And so we've turned that into, teaching more classes that cater to businesses, and also opening up a consultation arm of Seedcrest so that we can help to incubate some of these businesses and help them to navigate the waters, so to speak.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is definitely crazy. It's made it busy, like super busy. You know what I mean? Yeah. Any events we go to and stuff, people ask, 100 questions or whatnot. And so, and, you want to be friendly and do everything you can, and especially like emails and everything else like that, and messages on Facebook and stuff. So it's been interesting, and you try to help everybody. One thing I think that's helped is just the networking. Like, I'm about to get into the wholesale world real heavily just because of a incident that I was a part of in the wholesale world that I didn't like. So, to me, I'm like, well, we're going to fix the problem then. That's how we work. So, yeah. And then I just, networking like that and meeting people that have the product and then the end results, with the dispensaries. And then, so that's it's been super interesting. And then having that reaching out like that's been crazy networking that I'd never expected, just doing a podcast about cannabis in New Mexico.
Well, we're coming up just on the end of our time. Megan, if you don't have any other questions, I'll let these folks plug where we can find NMCannaCast.
Definitely.
Oh,
Right.
right.
Yeah, where can we find it?
Well, you guys can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, pretty much even Anchor FM. You can find us on pretty much any of those platforms, and we're also on Facebook. Our Facebook group is going to be NMCannaCast, as well as Twitter. So we're all over the place. When new things pop up, we try to get a part of it. But if you just Google NMCannaCast or search us on Instagram, you'll find us. So NMCannaCast all over the place, and even our email is nmcannacast@gmail.com.
Well, thanks to all three of you for joining us for our special crossover. I'm sorry, Megan.
No, I said great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for our special crossover. I'm thinking of Gary Marshall sitcoms with like Happy Days and all the classic crossovers. Yeah.
Hopefully this will become one of the classics for New Mexico.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys.